topic, and that's our expression for the day. So again, thinking about progress. So now it's time to think in a positive way, I think, and that is to think about what is something we can say when it comes to something positive. So here's our expression for the day. The expression is by leaps and bounds. Everyone, you try that. By leaps and bounds. Now, leaping and bounding basically means like jumping really, really, really far. So when you think about leaping, right, leaping and then bounding, these are just very different ways to, very similar ways to say jumping, but jumping very far. Okay, so in fact, if you notice in the pictures I have here, these particular organizations use a picture of a frog. So when you think about leaping and bounding, maybe you think about frogs, right? But I want you to notice that we use this expression talking about very rapid progress, making big progress. So in this case, if you notice, it's similar to the word quickly, but we almost always use it in a positive way. So everyone, look at the pictures on the screen. So it says Leaps and Bounds Tutorial Center. So for example, what is a tutorial center? What do you think they do at a tutorial center? Who can tell us? What do you think, Dulce?
Probably it's a class information for the class. So
Yeah. In fact, if you notice, look next to the frog. It says believe, achieve, excel. Right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And now I think Excel here is not Microsoft Excel. I think it means like excellent, right? So,
Okay.
and I see the frog on the books there. I didn't know that frogs could study, but I think it basically, yeah, is like education. So many of these leaps and bounds, guys, if you look at all of the examples, they all have pictures of children. In fact, look at the bottom, Montessori. Does anybody know what Montessori is?
This is a school?
Yeah, it's a special kind of approach.
Yeah, I know them.
Do you know this,
yes.
Saba? Yeah.
Yes. It's a kind of education, but with some tools to mention to kids how to some for kids to know colors, to know weight, to know different things.
Yeah. So again, the approach was developed, I think, almost 100 years ago, maybe more or less. But I think, again, I don't remember right offhand. But basically, the Montessori approach is, now here in most schools we have, kindergarten, first grade, second grade, and so on. But Montessori is usually ungraded, which means that children can kind of explore. They touch things, they move things, they sort, and they learn things in the beginning kind of by themselves. Obviously there's a teacher there, but it's ungraded. So that basically means that students can make their progress without thinking about, did you finish the first year or the second year, and so on. So the Montessori approach is still a kind of a popular approach, but honestly, it is a difficult approach to use because it's kind of hard to do this with big school systems because you need lots of resources. But obviously the Montessori approach has been very popular over the years. So, but if you notice again the frog, the leaps and bounds. In fact, guys, if you notice real quickly, do you remember last session when we talked about pronunciation? Do you notice here the letter N? It says leaps and bounds. What does the N mean there?
End.
Yeah, so if you notice, Rena, this is like what we talked about last session. Many people use that N in a spelling way to make things shorter. So yeah, it's leaps and bounds. So guys, here's a good opportunity for us to think about some positive things. So when we think about leaps and bounds, we're thinking about making progress. Now, I hope everybody feels like your English has improved by leaps and bounds, right? Right. Of course.
Right.
Excellent answer. I like that. Okay, so here's our chat question of the day. And again, you could use the chat box if you like, or you can use the microphone. But throughout history, people have always worried that technology grows faster than our ability to truly understand how it can affect our lives. Now, everybody, let's think about the last 20 years. So starting at around 2000, and the incredible growth in the impact of technology on humanity. So I was curious to say, in your opinion, which technological developments have had the greatest positive influences, and which ones maybe have had the most negative ones on people's lives? So let's focus more on the positives first. So what do you think? You can use the chat box if you like, or if you want to use the microphone. What are some things you think that have had positive influences on us? Dulce, what do you think? Again, our expression for the day, by leaps and bounds. And again, we often use this more in positive context. So I think we can agree, for example, like cell phone technology, the internet has really grown by leaps and bounds. It really has changed by leaps and bounds. And I hope everybody here feels like their English has grown by leaps and bounds. Now I know for me, my Spanish has not grown by leaps and bounds anymore. So I don't use it every day. So now I don't feel like a frog. I don't know. What do I feel like? I don't know. But in this case, I'm not the frog anymore. So, okay.
Like turtle?
Maybe a turtle. I don't know. Maybe a turtle who's asleep. I don't know, Saba. I can't think of a good animal to compare it to. Okay, well, guys, the last part of our time here is going to be focusing on a new grammar, a tricky grammar topic, and I think everybody can agree. This is a topic that everybody, whether you're the most advanced level student all the way to a beginning student, has difficulty with, and that is prepositions. Now, I'm going to read a little bit, but there's some activities that you guys are going to get to do with me. So this week, we're going to look at prepositions and talk a little bit about prepositional usage. Now, here comes the first problem. English has over 150 prepositions. That is far more than any language pretty much in existence. So for example, for my Spanish-speaking students, Spanish really only has about 23 prepositions, though often Spanish will use groups of words that can function as a preposition. So English does too. But in terms of unique prepositions, English has over 150. That is a lot. And like we said before, far more than most languages. So this brings up one of the first problems when it comes to students learning English, and that is this. A preposition or prepositional idea in your language might translate into several different prepositions in English. So for example, for my Spanish-speaking students, you know the word por. Okay, so if you don't speak Spanish, guys, the word por can translate into any of these following words: by, for, because of, through, by way of, or on. Do we see the problem here? One word, one little word in Spanish can translate into 4, 5, 6 more different meanings in English. Now, I'm sure this is probably true of many of the other languages here in our group. One particular word, how you might use it in your language, may have many, many different meanings in English. So that's our first problem. Students often struggle with which prepositions to use. Okay, now guys, I'm going to leave this on the screen just for a couple of minutes. Now, you don't have to write anything. Okay, you don't have to write anything. You're not going to share any answers with us. But what I want you to do right now is I want you to think about how would you translate these into your language. Okay, so I'm going to read them real quickly, and then I'm just going to give you a couple minutes to look at the screen. And I want you to think about how would you say it in your language. So number one, it's 1 o'clock in the morning. Number two, the money is in the desk. Number three, you need to sit in your seat. Number four, in a way, she's right. Number five, he's an actor in the movie. And number six, you're in for it now. All right, so guys, I'm going to give you about 2 minutes. How would you translate these into your language? So I just want you to take a moment, think about that, okay? So let's take about 2 minutes. I'll come back in 2 minutes, and then I'll tell you what we're going to do next, okay? Okay. Now, again, we're not going to share our answers because obviously it would be difficult for all of us to understand all of the different languages in the group. But what I wanted you to notice is all of these expressions have one word in common. Can you recognize which word that they all share?
In.
In.
All right. Congratulations, Rena. You win the free ice cream. So go to your refrigerator. So Raina, go to your refrigerator and see if you have any ice cream. Okay. Yeah. So again, the reason I wanted to do this little exercise is because, as you can see in English, we would use the word in all of these situations. However, they're all different. Each one is describing a different kind of situation. Now, we're going to talk more about them in just a moment, but what I want you to think about is when you were translating these, when you were thinking in your language, did you use the same word for every sentence? Did you use the same word? Did you use the word in or the translation of the word in all of these examples? Yes or no?
In. Yes.
The same word.
Almost the same word.
Okay, so not the same word though. Okay, so what about our Spanish speakers? Did we use in for all of these?
Yes, I think.
Sorry, Dulce, but no, you didn't.
No.
Not if you were thinking in Spanish. You would not use in necessarily for all of these. Okay.
I know, but in my understand.
Well, but see, that's and that's what I'm talking about, Dulce, is of course, when we understand the sentence in our language, it's probably going to be a little bit different, right? Rena, what about in Japanese? Same word for each one or different?
No difference.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mie, what about you?
Different.
Different. Okay. Sunny?
Very different.
Very different. Okay. Well, again, the reason I did this exercise was because we can see the problem here. Here in English, we use the same word for all of these situations. But the truth is, you probably did not use the same word. And that's part of what we were talking about here today, is that prepositions, especially these little words like in, are not going to translate perhaps the same way. So the first question students want to know, Mr. John, if we have 150 prepositions, how are we going to learn them? Well, guys, I have 3 recommended approaches, and these recommendations, I would say, you probably need to use a combination of these approaches to help you learn about prepositions. So guys, here we go. Number 1, obviously it's good to learn the general meanings of these prepositions. So for example, the word in, most of us would think of the word in as like inside. Right? So for example, if you said the money is in the desk, you probably thought, well, that seems to be the most general meaning, to be inside of something. Now that's good. That's a good start. Another way to think about prepositions, though, is that prepositions don't always belong to the same category. For example, the word in we used when with talking about time, like in the morning, but we also used it with location, like in the desk. So that's, again, to recognize prepositions have general meanings, but then they have many different uses. So again, many different categories to think about. And then finally, we often use the word in prepositions in more idiomatic use, and then of course thinking about how we use them in specific contexts. So again, the truth here is there is no one good way, there is no one best way to learn prepositions. Instead, you have to use some kind of combination of these 3. And in fact, probably for number 3 there, the context is going to help you a lot in thinking about how we group ideas together. And you'll see what I mean here in just a moment. Okay, so first off, what do we mean by general meaning? Well, when we go to the dictionary, generally we think about that first meaning. Okay, now here's the first problem. As we said before, there are 150 prepositions in English. Now, guys, I know you're home, right, in the quarantine, or maybe you're not going out very much, but I'm pretty sure most of us don't want to spend all of our time learning all 150 prepositions. So I don't know, maybe, do you? Do you want to spend all your time memorizing these 150?
No.
Okay, Rena says no. So everybody, that means no. Yeah, so Rena, that's our problem. Is it possible to just memorize all of them?
No.
Yeah, probably not. And
No.
I recognize that because again, even though Spanish has only 23 prepositions, I still struggle with prepositions in Spanish. So again, it's not going to be just possible to memorize them. So one of the recommendations I'm going to make as a beginning is to focus on the ones that we use the most, that have the most common use, okay? And then later we can begin to expand our knowledge by adding more words to our understanding. Now, let's take a look for just a moment. I'm going to share with you in the Google Classroom a list of prepositions and different ways that you can look at them. So, but what I'm going to show you here is there's a web page called EnglishClub.com, and the nice thing about this on the English Club is they have a list here. As you can see, there are prepositions, and I'll kind of zoom in here. This list here is going to give you the full list of prepositions that we have in English, but that's obviously not a good place to start. So if you notice here, there's a link that says here is a preposition short list. So I'm going to click on that link here, and you will see on the screen, this is a much shorter list of prepositions. It's still a lot, but it's a much shorter list of prepositions that I think would be a good place for you to start when it comes to learning about prepositions. Now, even this list, though, might be a little long at the beginning. So what I might recommend is taking some time and look at the words and say, well, do I know at least some of the basic meanings or how they're used? So again, I'm going to share this to our Google Classroom so that way you can go and look at them a little bit more in detail. And of course, it's not going to be possible for us to study, all 150 prepositions at the moment. But again, you need a place to start, and that's what I'm going to recommend, is that this list at least is a shorter list, and these are probably words that are prepositions that are much more common for us to use. So but anyway, that's just to show you that yes, you can find these resources on the internet. All right, so let's go back to our presentation. So all right, returning to our idea of general meanings. So I want to jump into that just real quickly. So for example, let's use the word in as our example. So I'm going to click here. One of the resources I'm going to recommend is the Learner's Dictionary. So I'm going to bring that up on the screen. So if you notice, I already have it ready for you. It's the Learner's Dictionary, which is one that I like to use for students. So I already have the example of the word in on the screen. Now, everybody, when we think about the preposition use of in, first off, the word in can be used many different ways. But in just thinking about the general meaning of the preposition, so take a look at that very first meaning. If you notice, the first meaning and even the second meaning are focusing on location or position, right? The second meaning is thinking about being inside of something. So if you notice, this is what we think of as the general meaning of the word in, that first or second definition. Now, of course, part of the problem here is there are lots of different meanings to the word in, as you saw just a moment ago. In fact, if I scroll through here and try not to get sick when I scroll through this list, as you can see, there are 5, 6, 7, 8. Yeah, in fact, if you kind of go to the end of the list itself, there are about 17 different meanings, 17 different uses for the word in. So now you see another problem here. Not only do you have 150 prepositions, but even some of the prepositions, like the word in, for example, can be used in many, many different ways. So that brings up, again, another problem for students. So not only do we have 150 prepositions, many of these prepositions have different meanings, okay? All right. Now, again, I'm going to post this to the Google Classroom, but in thinking about how we use prepositions, another way to think about them is to think about their categories. Now, again, we're not going to read all of the examples on the right side, but everyone, look at the left side here. So when we think of prepositions, what do prepositions do? Well, they help connect to tell us about different things. So everyone, you can say this with me there at your computer or in front of your phone. Let's say these together. Time, place, direction or movement, agency, instrument or device, reason or purpose, connection, and origin. So prepositions can tell us a lot of these different things. Now, if I think about the word in, I look at the if I look at the categories, you'll notice again, in is often used to tell us about time. In is often used to tell us of location or place. So that's helpful because when we think about those 17 different meanings, most of them are going to be connected to these two examples here, to these two categories of time and of place. Now, they're not the only ones, but that's the good news. Most of the uses of in belong to those two categories. So that makes things a little bit easier when we think about using the word in and its different use, okay? All right, now, finally, we talked about idiomatic and contextual uses of prepositions. So, for example, many prepositions can often be used as parts of idiomatic expressions. So, for example, one of the examples that we had just a moment ago was using the preposition in for the expression in for. So, if you notice, one meaning of in for when you use them together means like to experience something, like you're sure to experience something. So for example, if you see it says, you're in for a great ride in that car. Now, what does that mean? Well, that car, maybe that sports car, or that new car, you're going to get a good ride. It's going to be great. So notice here we're using it in a more idiomatic way. So of course, we have to think about the context of that expression. So notice when I use the expression in for, it usually means to experience something. Now, if you notice though, the next expression, in for it, notice when we add the word it changes. Yeah, notice that? So for example, in for it means in trouble. So for example, notice it says, I think I'm in for it now. I forgot to study for my test. Uh-oh, now I'm in trouble. So now notice just one little word changes the meaning of how we use this expression. Now guys, the only way you're going to learn the use of the word in here is to think about how it's working together with other words, how it's working together in this idiomatic way, okay? So again, that's part of our challenge. We've got 3 different things to think about when it comes to using prepositions, okay? Now, finally, when we think about context, one thing I'm going to recommend to everybody, okay, so I'm going to really emphasize this, is it might be most helpful, so notice I'm underlining that many times there, to think about learning prepositions in context along with their individual meanings. So again, don't just think about their individual meaning, like those 17 different meanings of the word in. Think about using the word in conjunction with different expressions. Now guys, you might remember when you were beginning English students, you probably learned these expressions, right? In the morning, in the afternoon, in the evening, right? Do you remember those? Okay. We also use them with specific locations. So for example, we use it with cities. So for example, in New York, countries in Europe, right? Or in regions, right? Countries like in France and England. We could also use it with certain location expressions like in the middle of the road. Don't drive in the middle of the road. And then you probably also remember that we use the word in specific phrases, again, often idiomatic. So for example, are you interested in? Are you interested in doing something? So you guys are interested in studying English, right? And then finally, here's one, to take part in, like to participate. So for example, you guys are taking part in English class this morning. So when thinking about learning prepositions, my advice to everybody is I think it's most helpful. So one more time, I'm going to circle it there. It's most helpful to think about thinking about learning prepositions in context. So yes, do I need to know the basic meanings? Absolutely. But you also need to think about the context of how we learn prepositions. Because I think everybody here recognizes that if I just try to translate prepositions, you're not going to be successful. In fact, you're often going to make mistakes. Okay, guys, we have just enough time to try this little activity, okay? So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to read each one again on the left side, and then on the right side, here are some meanings or categories that would refer to how the word in is being used. So for example, let's look on the right side. Letter A is to take part in something, like a role. Letter B, used to make a statement or description of something. Letter C, the location of something, so where something's located. Letter D, an expression of time. Letter E, idiomatic, which means to be in trouble. Okay, so we just talked about that one. And then letter F, the location inside of something. Okay, now guys, let's pull up the chat box. So I want everybody to try this activity now. Okay, so for example, if I say number 1, it's 1 in the morning, which letter do you think we would use for this example? All right.
D.
Yeah, congratulations. Most people, yeah, putting the letter D. It's an expression. It's a time expression. Okay, what about number 2? The money is in the desk. Which letter do you think? Okay. All right, now I see 2 people put the letter C, and it is describing something, but I think if you look closely, it's more about letter F. It's describing the location of something, and again, specifically inside. So when we say the money is in the desk, we know to look inside of the desk. So it could be letter C, but I think letter C would be better with another example. So let's try number 3. So you need to sit in your seat. What do you think about letter number 3? Okay, yeah, now we've got some answers there. Now, Sunny makes a good observation. The funny thing about the word seat is for some reason we use the word in with the word seat, which kind of would seem like we're inside of the seat. But unfortunately, that doesn't really make a lot of sense. But we do use in with the word seat. Yeah, not on. So here's one thing you probably noticed. We sit on a chair, but we sit in a seat. Yeah, so I don't understand that either. But I think in this case, Sonny, we probably are going to choose letter C for number 3, because that would be the location of somebody. Yeah, so in this case, I think letter C would fit for number 3. All right, what about number 4? In a way, she's right. Which one would be number 4? Okay, so I see a couple of answers there. Yeah, so actually number 4 would be with letter B. So we often use these kinds of expressions in a way, like to describe something, to give somebody to give their opinion, or to describe how they're going to prepare to make a statement. So in this case, the answer for number 4 would be letter B. Now you might be familiar with this. Some people might say in that case, or in that situation. Are you familiar with those kinds of expressions? In that case, in that situation. So that's actually similar to number 4 there in a way. So what it means is like in this way, or in that case, or in that situation. So in that case, you're describing that situation. Okay, what about number 5? He's an actor in the movie. Which one would that be? Okay. Yeah, so it would be letter A, to take part in something, like a role in a movie, right? So for example, you are students in my class. So that would be letter A, you're taking part in the class, right? Okay, guys, and I think we can guess what number 6 is going to be. What do you think? Yeah, so in this case, that means you're in trouble. Now, sometimes I say this to my dog, right? You're in for it now. Yeah, so usually when my dog does something bad. But in this case, you're in trouble now, right? So guys, you can practice using this afternoon with your husbands, your friends, right? Your children. So there you go. Okay, now guys, I had a couple of other activities planned in the presentation, but we're just about out of time. So I'm going to go ahead and what I'd like to do is go ahead and get you prepared for the activity you're going to do this week. So again, what I would like to do, maybe maybe we'll do this one next week. I was going to focus on some prepositions and features and phrases that are often confused. But I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to save this till next week's class. So I'm going to skip through this, and I'll save this for next week. since again, we don't have time to go through them. But let's go ahead and talk about our homework for next week. So just like this week's homework with the verbs, for next week, I'm going to post a little activity, and the activity is basically going to be much like the other grammar activity we've done, which is some of the questions will ask you to choose a correct answer. Some of the questions will ask you to write something to make a sentence, okay? Now, the idea is this is to think of this as a way to just kind of see how many prepositions you know, all right, and how many that you can use. So again, think of this as a learning experience. So if you know all of them and you do well, that's great. If you don't know all of them, that means okay, we've got more to learn. And maybe we'll continue the preposition topic into next week so that we can continue to practice with them. But I thought this would be a good way to start the discussion. So again, I'm going to post this activity on Friday. So I know you guys have the verbs activity, which is due this Friday. So I won't post this activity until this Friday. So again, it'll be posted on Friday, and then it'll be due the next Friday on June 26th. And that's